Hello again, welcome back everyone. LiquorHound here with you, and thank you for joining me once again for another spirit review video. In honor of St. Patrick's Day, I decided to pull down some Irish whiskeys, and we're going to kind of go through, and I wanted the focus of this video to be on what's the big difference between the low, inexpensive price range of Irish whiskeys through the mid-range and into the ultra premium or the expensive Irish whiskeys. What's the big difference in those? And that's what we're going to attempt to find out today. Now, the one thing to note about the majority of these is that a lot of Irish whiskeys will use a combination of malted and unmalted barley. They'll also use copper pot stills, those big copper pot stills that we usually see in Scotland. Well, they use those a lot in Ireland as well. And then they also use some of the column stills. Those are those big high volume. They pump out a lot of whiskey on those column stills, but it produces a lighter, high proof spirit that's usually very sweet and very floral, but it kind of lacks on the viscosity and on the finish. So those higher grain whiskeys, that's the other thing, those column stills are usually making grain whiskey, which means they'll use not just malt, whether it's malted, unmalted, but they'll also use corn, maybe some rye or wheat in those mash bills. They'll take those grain light whiskeys, and then they'll take the copper distilled whiskeys, copper pot distilled whiskeys, and they'll mature those up in either ex-bourbon barrel, like the Paddy's is ex-bourbon barrel matured, or a combination of ex-bourbon and maybe ex-sherry casks, which a lot of these use a lot of that, and as the base. And then once they hit their age profile, which for Irish whiskey has to be at least 3 years old. Typically, it's around 4 to 8 for the lesser, somewhere around 10 to 16 for the mid-range, and then usually it's above that for the expensive ones. And let's go ahead and introduce the players. First, Paddy's Irish Whiskey. I think it's the most popular Irish whiskey in Ireland. I know it's like in the world it's third or fourth or so most consumed Irish whiskey, so it's very popular at $17 coming out of the Middleton distillery. And next up we have Jameson's. Everybody knows Jameson's. This is the standard. Unfortunately, it's just a 200 milliliter bottle, but regular 750 of Jameson should sell for around $24. That's using the combination of, again, bourbon, ex-bourbon, and ex-sherry goes into this one. Focus probably more on ex-bourbon. Then we're going to step up to the Bushmills 10-year-old. Bushmills 10-year-old retails around $48. It uses only malted barley in their distillation, and it's copper pot distilled. That's the one thing we're going to start seeing, that when you start getting into the pure pots where it's a lot of copper pot distillation going in there, those things get very heavy and dense in flavor. A great example of that one's at the mid-range is going to be the Powers John's Lane 12-year-old. This one, again, ex-bourbon, ex-sherry, 12 years of age. Retail pricing on it, $62. We do see a bump in proof here because these three were 80 proof, and this one is 92 proof. So far as which distilleries are coming out of, it's Middleton, Bushmills Distillery, and Middleton. And I tried to incorporate all three of the major distilleries in Ireland, which include Cooley, the next one. Tyrconnell, that one is coming out of the Cooley Distillery. This is a single malt Irish that's 10 years old, that's finished in Madeira casks and bottled at 92 proof here for $100. So we've gone from $48, $62 now to a $100 price point. From there, I wanted to include a independent bottling because we're starting to see more of that coming out. These little small bottlers are sourcing casks or sourcing maybe a few casks and putting those together themselves and releasing special releases. And that's what we have here with the exclusive malts from the Creative Whiskey Company, is I guess the parent company of that brand, Exclusive Malts. They do single malts as well, but this is a 13-year-old Irish whiskey that was distilled in 2002. It's a single cask, unchill filtered, no coloring added, bottled at 105.6 proof. $125 for this one. This one, I believe, yeah, in a refill sherry butt. Okay, it's probably very tired by the look of it, because again, on this one they didn't add any coloring, so that is the natural color, which I will go to say about the rest of them. Irish whiskey is allowed to use some caramel coloring, also known as E150A. And that caramel coloring isn't used to the extent that it can be, I should say it isn't abused to the extent that it can be in some other worlds of whiskeys, because they're not really typically trying to go for a really dark profile. They're usually just trying to add just enough to create a consistent color quality from batch to batch. That's why stuff, when you look at, you know, these, they're not super dark or anything like that. So they're just trying to maintain that color consistency. Okay, and lastly, of course, now we're stepping up from $125 all the way up to $330 for the Redbreast 21. Yeah, that's the price point of it now, unfortunately. I remember when, well, kind of like all of these, I remember when the prices were, and it wasn't too long ago, the price on this one used to be about $245, and now we're up to $330. 92 proof, aged 21 years in oak. That's a astounding length of time for any whiskey, and so we're going to see how that fares when we get to it. All right, Middleton Distillery, by the way. So Middleton, Cooley, Middleton, Bushmills, Middleton, and Middleton. All right, starting with the Paddies. Paddies, I think they aged roughly around 4 to 7 years of age going into this one. Mostly ex-bourbon barrel, matured Irish whiskey, column, and little pot. On the nose, pretty, I'm going to call this one, it's pretty fresh. It's very light, aromatically, vanilla, caramel sweetness, a little bit of red fruits in there. When I say red fruits, it's typically like red berries, cherries, a little raspberry, a little strawberry. Usually I like to talk about, when I say mixed berries, it's cooked down. I'm thinking they're like being sauteed in that caramel, so they're starting to condense flavors. A nice little honey malt base underneath there with that big vanilla kind of running. And that's pretty much it on the nose. Let's go ahead and taste it and see where we're at. For $17, the Paddy's Irish Whiskey. It's nice. It's a medium viscosity, not super viscous, but yeah, medium, maybe a touch under medium. And as it enters, let's judge the second one, because I always say the first one's kind of like a palate primer. Here we go. Enters that caramel sweetness. The malty base is there with that vanilla tone. Cinnamon starts ramping up. There's a big doughiness that kind of drops in right there before the mid palate. As the cinnamon's warming, you get that yeasty, doughy sourdough bread hit. Cereal grains, again, malty, but also just kind of like mixed grains kind of taste to it. And as soon as it kind of hits that peak on the mid palate, it actually starts to fade rather quickly. So to me, that one, a lot of that is happening right up front, all the way to the mid palate, and then it just kind of tapers off. Not a whole lot to it, but what it does very well. Very easy drinking. I would think that would make a great hot toddy, for example. All right, next up, let's go to the Jamesons. The big standard, right? All right. Again, column and pot distilled whiskeys, aged roughly about, I think this one's about 4 to 8 years old. I think this is 4 to 7, 4 to 8 here. A little more pot distilled character in this one. Pot distillations, again, the lighter grain whiskey, the column distillate, they'll usually be very vanilla heavy, light, maybe a little floral to them. It's very sweet caramel. And this one's a little more dense. It's starting to head into the deeper brown sugar, almost into molasses territory. And that's a signal to me of more pot distillation. But to be honest, there is a fair amount of grain whiskey in here. All right, let's go ahead and nose it. We got a good amount of malt, the base character. Honey on top of that malt. Caramel sweetness. That vanilla, that's that light grain whiskey. Cinnamon. There's a little bit of a dried fruit. That's that sherry cask. And the sherry cask almost seems like it's has a little, I'm not going to call it that. I'm not going to say that. That would sound bad if I, it's not sulfured, but what it is that sherry cask has a lot of that dried fruit characteristic. Probably a little, it's not big, it's very faint, but there's a little bit of that stone fruits like figs and prunes and maybe a little apricot in there as well, with a little hint of papaya funk, which is odd. But let me double check that. Shake that glass, get it to coat the entire glass. That's what I'm doing there. Yeah, it's just the faintest little hint of a slight little papaya. I don't even really want to call it that. Let's just stay focused on, I would call it baked apples is probably more of what I'm getting. Baked apples, a little bit of a mixed berries and some dried fruit character going on. That's what I get in that one. Alright, let's go ahead and taste it. Medium viscosity, nice, not bad. There is a fair amount of grain whiskey in there. So when I nosed it, you know, I picked up the pot quality, pot distillation. But when you taste it, there's a lot of column grain distillate going on. It's very light caramel. Almost starts hinting at floral for this one. Yeah, it has got a lot of baked apples, a little bit of red berries mixed in with that apple. Hint of dried fruit character, and that's what I was picking up on the nose, almost as sulfur. It's just those dried fruits in there. There is no sulfur. And a good cereal malty base to it. Not overly complex by any means. Again, kind of similar to Paddy's. Very easy drinking, not complex. Yeah, really solid. Solid. For $24, that's not bad. And I can see why they sell a lot of it. Alright, now we're stepping up. 100% malted barley, 10-year-old Bushmills for $48, bottled at 80 proof. Gosh, yeah. I remember I reviewed this one a while back, and the one thing I remembered about it was that it maintained its profile. Because when I compare the new bottle, like this is, to an old bottle of Bushmills 10, very similar in profile. They've maintained their marks as far as what they're trying to hit with the blends really nicely there at Bushmills. Okay, so this one, the first thing I get is that big honey malt, brown sugar. I am noticing a little citrus pop now. A little citrus in this one. Probably leaning a little more towards lemon oil. Yep. It's almost like an underripe pineapple. It's got a little bit of that underripe pineapple tone to it. A little leather, and it's got that Bushmills barrel char. I talk about that quite often. It's in here as well. It's almost like that's their signature, is that barrel char. It's like a little smokiness, but it's not like, nothing like we think of Isla Whiskies, that big creosote, sooty, tarry smoke. Not like that. It's just barrel char. Really nice. A little cinnamon in there to go along with everything else. Yeah, mixed red berries in there. A little baked apple to go with that little lemon oil touch and that underripe pineapple. Alright, let's go ahead and taste it. Oh yeah, that's nice. Ooh, transitioning on the back end. As soon as it hits, it's still going. It's twisting over. Okay, let's try it. Here we go. Really nice balance of caramel and brown sugar on the sweetness. As it enters, you get that big, again, malt heavy base for this one. Not as much vanilla as you were getting here. This is dense, heavier. but big malt characteristic just laying the foundation. You get that barrel char smoke laying on top of that, and then you start picking up the fruits. Baked apples, that little lemon oil, that twist of lemon is in there. Underripe pineapple, I would call that in there as well. Cinnamon adds a little bit of warming as it hits that mid palate, and then as it turns over, that's where I started noticing this big twist as far as it started diving into like a chocolatey, dark chocolate, and then it started rolling over into like a leather tobacco tone onto the very back end. Almost roasted nuts in there as well. Let me try that one more time. I'm going to focus on the back end here. I wanted to see what that twist was doing. Yeah, it gets almost leathery up right before the mid palate actually. Leather comes in really pretty heavy. Mixed berries in there. Man, it's got a little bit of everything going on. But I would say the focus is the lemon oil, the underripe pineapple, the baked apples in this one. There's a little red fruits. But then as you hit that cinnamon, it starts twisting over. It first starts with cocoa powder. That leather is still maintaining right underneath that, so the cocoa's dusted on top of that. Yeah, twisting right into the dark chocolate, right into the roasted nuts. And you still have that big, heavy, old leather, maybe, and then the tobacco comes very, very late, but it's in there. Great, great whiskey. For $48, Bushmills 10. Pretty solid up here in this lineup. All right, Powers, John's Lane. Matter of fact, I'm going to need the double rinse on that one. It almost has like a roasted coffee bean in there with that roasted nuts on the back end. That's what really, the finish on this one, yeah, leaps and bounds longer than these. Okay, Powers, John's Lane. $62, 92 proof, 12-year-old combination ex-bourbon and ex-sherry. Pot distillation. Oh, that's nice. So on this one, more brown sugar focus on the nose. Red, it's got a little bit of that baked apple thing going on. A little bit of the red berries in here as well. Nobody to poke out. So again, mixed berries stewed down, because it's not like you can just pick out cherry or strawberry or raspberry. It's just them all cooked down together and mixed in heavy with that brown sugar. This cinnamon, there is a good vanilla tone. It almost comes, this comes off like red licorice in here. The vanilla in with those mixed berries. And there is some stone fruits in the background of this one. Dried fruits. Let's call it that. It's better than stone fruits. Stone fruits usually implies more freshness, more like plums or apricots or peaches. And the dried fruits, we're starting to get more into like a fig, sweet date here. At least on the nose. Let's go on the palate. Boom. Yeah, medium high viscosity, really nice. Big, rich combination again. Brown sugar heavy, but it's got a little bit of that caramel sweetness. Boy, that reminds me, yeah. That reminds me of some very, very old Canadian whiskeys. It's got this really big, heavy vanilla characteristic layering. That's what's doing me, reminding me of that. It's the amount of vanilla underneath. But once you get past that big brown sugar and it starts laying that big vanilla foundation, right up on top of that, malt, honey and malt, I would call that. And it feels like it's more rustic, almost like a, I don't know, unrefined honey, natural honey, beeswax. I would almost go into beeswax on this one. Yeah. And then you get a little bit of those, again, figs, that sweet date element starts showing up on the back end. It almost gets a little bit of leather in there as well on the back end. That's well-rounded Irish whiskey for Powers right there. $62. Long finish. Everything's still holding. Okay, we got to cut that one short as well. Here we go. All right, Tyrconnell. Now, Tyrconnell Cooley distillate. This is the one that's aged 10 years, ex-bourbon cask, and then I think it gets finished in the Madeira cask. All right, 92 proof, $100. Oh, that's got a wild nose. That one's very vibrant. It's floral, it's malty, it's got a little. This one has pineapple in it, almost on the nose. Not super sweet, just slightly underripe pineapple. Baked apples in here as well. Light cinnamon, baking cinnamon. Ooh, and then there's a little bit of that. There's a little sweet date, fig, golden raisin. That's what I'm getting in this one. Really nice nose. All right, let's taste it. Medium high viscosity. As it enters, more caramel, brown sugar, feels very balanced here. It's not too light and sweet with the caramel, but it's not too heavy with the brown sugar. Right into the golden apples that are baked, golden raisins, underripe pineapple. As you hit the mid palate and the baking cinnamon is in there, it's almost like it tastes like there's a little bit of a doughiness to it as well. The heart of a cinnamon roll on this one right there at that mid palate. The underripe pineapple thing though is very interesting how it keeps rolling. The honey, there's a big honey tone in here. That one's rolling very well. Yeah, this one was more like unfiltered honey, and this just feels like regular honey, clean beeswax in this one to go along with everything else that's happening. But right up front, boom, it enters so nice and light. It hints at floral tones. And then it starts getting leathery as well as you start getting right as soon as you hit that mid palate, it starts getting leather. A little hint of tobacco in this one on the very back end. But the Madeira is starting to drop all those mixed red berries. It's starting to drop that kind of date, fig, golden raisin element that's coming out of that. All in all, that's very complex whiskey. At $100, you know, that I can see why it's a jump up. Now, is it, you know, a lot better than the Powers? Not really. They're both great in different ways. Matter of fact, all three of these are fantastic in different ways. Finishes very long on all of those. This one's still going, but it has more unique notes in this one than this one or this one. But the Bushmills, that smoky barrel char, that's always unique for that one. Alright, exclusive malts, Creative Whiskey Company, Cooley distillate, 13-year-old Irish, 105.6 proof, 13-year-old. Whoa, big, again, this one leans a little more on caramel, I would say, on the nose than brown sugar. Very sweet. Malty, big honey tone. Matter of fact, this one on the nose has the most honey characteristic of all of those so far. Let me give it a little, coat the glass a little bit. There we go, boom. Yeah, once you coat the glass now, we can pick up that 105.6 proof. Yeah, honey malt, a little bit of mixed red berries in here. But I would call this one a combination more of focusing on baked apples again, red berries again. This one has a little bit of pears going on. But mostly focus on the caramel and honey and malt here. The fruits are underneath that. Alright, not super complex on the nose, but very powerful. Alright, let's taste it. Unchill filtered. Cask strength, you know, that's always going to give you the most flavor, and that's what it's doing. Ooh, brown sugar, caramel. A lot more caramel than brown sugar, just as it nosed. it enters, you start picking up. Let me double check that. Big cinnamon kind of kicks early. Cinnamon starts peaking a little early. Again, this one's more golden apples, but they're baked again. Has a little bit of that pear quality to it. Almost like honey drizzled pears on this one. And then right as soon as you get to that mid palate, cinnamon's kind of, it started early and it just ramped up just a little more. But then as you get to the top and it starts twisting over on this one, I start finding the sourness. There's a little bit of a sour tone to the fruits as it starts turning over. It starts getting a little cocoa dusting on top and leather on the back end. But the fruits on this one, the red berries that I was picking up early, as they twist over, they start feeling a little bit more of almost like a sour plum. It's very interesting how that one is. But that happens with single casks. They can be very unique and different. And that's usually why the distilleries will sell them off, because they're just off profile. To me, it has the most impact of flavor, but it's not the most complex in flavor. All right. But at $125, very happy to have that in the collection. All right, finally, Redbreast 21 coming out of Middleton, $330. All right, let's see what the big step up is all about. Yeah. Pretty much what I expected there. A heaping mound of tropical fruit. And I think that's what the big deal is about aged Irish whiskeys, and why you have to pay so much more for them is because they really start diving into big tropical notes. This one does. The Bushmills 21, the Jameson's rarest vintage. It's $500, but that one is just, it's even as full of as this one is of tropical fruits. That one's over the top. In particular, anyway, I ain't talking about vintages, but anyway, Redbreast 21 on the nose, big papaya, very ripe papaya. Very ripe papayas, when they start hitting that sweet point and they start getting just a smidge too old, they start developing that really big funk. This one has the funk on the nose of papaya. Guava is in there, pineapple juice, natural, not sweetened, not overly sweet. I love that papaya funk on the nose on this one though. And then there's some malt characteristic, but the malt whiskey in this one, it smells old. And what I mean by that is old whiskey, whether you're talking old single malts, old bourbons, a lot of these older whiskeys, especially from the 70s and 60s and so on, they get this real kind of, I don't want to, it's like a little bit of a machine oil, library bookish, garagey character to them. And I can pick that up in here. It's like a little bit of machine oil to go along with all that tropical fruit and that really nice malt. Ugh. All right, let's taste it. 92 proof, by the way. Yeah, that's the experience. It tastes pretty much exactly like it noses. It enters, you get this big, almost, it's like molasses, because it's not sweet. It's not like brown sugar, or definitely not like the caramel sweetness. It's almost like molasses and brown sugar together. And you can't even hardly focus on that before the big papaya tone hits you. Big papaya, pineapple juice, but it's, again, naturally sweetened. It's not super sweet. And a little guava in there as well. Those all just start layering up on top of that. And that malt old whiskey character is rolling underneath. That's providing the base for this one. That kind of dusty whiskey character. And that actually starts peeking through as you get to the mid palate and beyond. Leather, old leather. Almost like a, it's not quite cedar, but it reminds me of aged tobacco, the way aged tobacco will smell. That's what this one gets on there as well, on the palate, on the very back end. All right, yeah, that's greatness. But what have we learned here? What I will tell you is that, to me, the very expensive Irish whiskeys, you don't necessarily have to have them in your collection necessarily. I would almost recommend trying them at a bar, get a pour of it, see what you think of it before dropping the entire, you know, $300 and probably $50 or $60 out the door for this nowadays, and beyond that. But you will start getting tropical fruits once they start hitting probably 18-ish years and older. They start getting a tropical tone, some more than others. Redbreast 21 is a great example of it. And like I said, Jameson's Rarest Vintage, Bushmills 21, they all do that. So they are quite the experience, and they are very unique. You very rarely find that amount of tropical fruit in the mid-ranged Irish whiskey. They just need that time in the cask to develop those characteristics. But you do get glimpses of it, like you found here in this one. And to me, the most Irish style of them all can be found right here in the mid-range. When you're looking for Irish whiskey, pot distillate, you know, heavy, you'll find that in the mid-range price, and you'll get a really good glimpse of what Irish whiskey is. Now, for the $17, $24 Jamesons and Paddy's, it does taste, I mean, that is Irish whiskey as well, and it is very light and vibrant. But the problem there is going to be is that they're not great sippers because they don't have a long enough finish. So they kind of lack. Everything happens up front. They hit the mid palate where the spice kind of peaks, and then it just tapers off, and it usually tapers off pretty quickly. So for $17.24, you get the base experience. If you want the finish, you have to start stepping up into the $50 to $100 range, maybe $125 for a single cask. And then finally, you know, above that, you start getting into that unique territory. But I will say, not all of those are, you know, above $125 are great. So I would recommend, again, trying them before you buying for the very expensive Irish whiskeys. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you had a fantastic St. Patrick's Day. Thank y'all for watching. Keep leaving all those great comments. Really do appreciate it. And if you enjoyed this content, you can always join me over at patreon.com/LiquorHound, where I do a video review a week. So thank y'all once again. Everybody have a great day, and cheers.